Hi, this is Thomas LaFoe from the Instructional Media Center, and in this tutorial we'll be looking at the features of the Pen tool in Adobe Illustrator. Here I have a new blank document, and I'm going to select the Pen tool. Now with the Pen tool we can control both the fill and the stroke of a path that we're about to draw. The fill will fill in any closed paths, and the stroke will follow along the edge of the path. For this tutorial, since we're not going to be starting with a closed path, I'm going to select None as my fill color. This can be done in a number of places, but I'm going to use the options here at the top of the screen. If I click on this solid square, or the one that's white right now, I'm going to select this as None, which is the white swatch with the red line through it. Right next to this is the fill color, which is the square with the hole in the middle. Here I'm going to click on that drop-down box and just select black. Right next to the stroke color are the stroke options. Here, for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to set the weight of this stroke to be 4 points so that we can see what's going on. Now that we have our options set, we can begin. We're going to draw a zigzag line. We're going to click to add the first anchor point, and this will be the start of our line. Now we're going to click and add the first peak or the first valley, depending on the direction you're going. And you'll see that the Pen tool now connects these two anchor points with a straight line called a path. We're going to continue along with more anchor points just to create our zigzag line. This gives you an example of a path in Illustrator. But of course the Pen tool is used for more than just connecting dots with straight lines. One way that I learned to use the Pen tool is to take these straight lines and these points and change them with the Convert Anchor Point tool. To find that tool, click and hold down the mouse on your Pen tool and a little pop-up menu will appear. Select the Convert Anchor Point tool and mouse over the second anchor point that we added. One of the things to remember is the direction in which you drew the path. In this case, we worked from left to right. So when we begin to convert our anchor points, we'll want to drag the tangent line toward the right of the anchor. Once you click and drag this line, you'll see that the lines leading to and away from the anchor point are curved. If you want this line to remain straight, you can hold Shift after you start drawing that line. Continuing in this same fashion, I'm going to add curves to our other anchor points. I'm going to click on the anchor point, start dragging, and then hold Shift to keep that line straight. Repeat on the fourth anchor point. Click and drag, hold Shift to keep that line straight. And again on the second to last point, click and drag and hold Shift to keep that line straight. Now you don't have to keep the line straight, you can change the direction of these as you see fit. But that's just an example to show you a quick way to add some curves to this line. Another shortcut with the Convert Anchor Point tool is to mouse over one of these anchor points and hold Shift before you begin to draw. While holding Shift, if I click and drag, this will actually reposition this anchor point. So I'm still holding Shift. This can also be used on these endpoints. So now we've created a wavy line using the Pen tool and the Convert Anchor Point tools to change a zigzag line into this curved line. Once I move this first anchor point, you'll notice that the two handles on the second anchor point have now turned into just one. And that's because this part of the handle is the one that controls this line segment. If I click and drag this handle here, you can see that now I'm actually adjusting just that first part of this line here. Again, if I hold Shift and select one of these anchor points, I can then grab the second handle and adjust it as I see fit. I can choose how sharply that line curves, I can change the direction, or I can just click without holding Shift on an anchor point and it will convert it to its original state, that original corner point. Now again, if I didn't like the shape that I created the first time, I can click and drag again and add a different slope to that line. The Convert Anchor Point tool is a fairly powerful tool to use. If I wanted to do a little more fine-tuning and not necessarily complete reshaping, what I can do is select the Direct Selection tool. Typically in Illustrator you're using this black arrow. This is used to actually grab paths and move them, to grab paths or shapes and move them or resize them on this drawing. You can see I can narrow this down, I can stretch it vertically. But the Direct Selection tool will allow me to select one of these anchor points. Right now, when I have a path selected and I select that direct selection tool, you'll notice that all of the anchor points are filled in with blue. If I click to select one of these anchor points, you'll notice the other anchor points have changed to white, and the one I've selected is highlighted in blue, or filled in with that blue color. Now I can grab things like the anchor and move it around. I can grab the handles. Now I'm going to click on the selection tool and just click to drag this path out of the way. After you begin to understand the way lines curve to and from anchor points, you can then start to draw the line just using the pen tool itself. Here I'm going to click and hold on the Convert Anchor Point tool and move back to my pen tool. We're going to start in the same way that we did our zigzag line by adding an anchor point. And then I'm going to click, and instead of just clicking to add the second anchor point, I'm going to click and drag. And you'll see that what that does is it automatically creates that handle that we created with the Convert Anchor Point tool. When I let go of the mouse, you'll see that it actually traces that line with the stroke. And I can click and drag again, click and drag, and when I'm finished, I can click just a single time for my last anchor point. Now once again, I'm going to choose my selection tool and move this out of the way. And we're just creating some shapes here to get familiar with this pen tool. You can also change directions of your curves. So if I click to add my first anchor point, I'm going to click and drag to create my first curve. And if I go in a different direction with this line, and I click maybe above that tangent line, you can see now I get more of an S-curve. Another way to draw these sort of S-curves is to add your tangent lines at the beginning and the end of the path as opposed to the middle. The way this is done is by clicking and dragging your tangent line to start, click in the center of the path, and then click and drag once again to create the end point. One thing to be careful of when drawing curves like this is if I were to go back and add another point to this line, you'll see that it continues the latter part of that curve that we added to the last point. Now it curves out and then comes back to this point here. However, if we wanted to draw a question mark shape similar to what we have but a little bit more consistent, I'm going to delete this shape that we have here, select my pen tool, and use that same idea. I'm going to click and draw a tangent line to start, click to add my center point, click and drag to add the top part of that curve, and then when I click to finish this question mark shape, I can click and drag and actually get the top part of that question mark lined up the way I want it. So this, if I click off of this so we don't see those different tangent lines there, gives you more of that fishhook curve. I'm going to move this question mark shape out of the way and bring back one of the S-curves that I created earlier. If you have a path and want to continue drawing with this path, so let's say we wanted to close this in and create kind of a S shape as opposed to just a line, what I can do is select my pen tool and mouse over the very end point of this path. You'll notice that right next to the pen tool you get a little slash mark, and this means I can click here and it tells Illustrator that I'm continuing that path. So I'm going to click on that point, then I'm going to move slightly below this line here and click and drag to add another curve. Then again I'm going to click and drag just a little bit closer to the line, and I'm going to mouse over my last point. And you'll notice that at this point I now have a little circle next to my pen tool. This means that I'm about to close this path. So when I click here, it's going to add a connecting line that finishes out that shape. Now again, with a shape like this, if you're just kind of adding points in here at random, you can then go back and use the multiple tools to kind of shape this up a little better. In this case, I'm going to grab my direct selection tool, grab my second point here, and just kind of adjust this the way I want it to be. I can do the same thing with the second anchor point that I added here. And I can also come in here and grab my handles and just change the angle of that line a little bit. Once you have a filled in shape, you'll notice that even with my selection tool, if I try to click and drag in the middle of this shape, it's not going to select it because all we've done is created a path. And remember, at the beginning of this tutorial, we set our fill to none, which means there's nothing inside this path to click on. If I mouse over the edge, I can very easily select that shape and then click and drag, as long as I'm clicking directly on the path. If we fill this in with a color, even white will fill that in and let us click and drag in the middle. But notice that now we can actually use our fill options and fill this in with whatever color we like. Hopefully this tutorial will serve as a brief introduction to the pen tool in Illustrator. One way to become more familiar with the tool is by importing images or other drawings and actually trying to trace them. Always remember that anchor points and tangent lines are not permanent. Use the Direct Selection tool and the Convert Anchor Point tools to adjust any points that don't fit. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, or you can visit our website at library.mstate.edu/imc for our contact information and links to additional handouts and tutorials. Thanks for watching.